Hey, what's going on, everybody? So in this video, I'm going to show you how to get started with Appwrite. So this will be a quick start tutorial where we'll just jump right into it after a quick introduction, and we'll set up an application with Appwrite. We'll learn how to set up a backend, how to interact with it from the client side, and by the end of this video, you'll be quite familiar with how things work. So we'll do a build and launch tutorial if you choose to follow. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is because I actually put out an Appwrite quick start tutorial about 2 years ago, and since then, so much has changed. So we've added new products, we've updated the console UI in certain areas, specifically our database. It looks completely different from what it did 2 years ago, and how you interact with it also changed too. So the SDK has been updated, and we've also added some products that really redefine what Appwrite is. So it's time to update that video and show you how to work with the new Appwrite. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with what Appwrite is, think of this as a hybrid between Firebase and Vercel, but open source. Now, that's quite a bit there because Firebase is a backend as a service and Vercel is a front-end hosting option. Well, Appwrite is actually all of that put together. So that means that you have your traditional backend as a service. You can build out your database, authentication, file storage, serverless functions, but now we have a product called Appwrite Sites, which we'll see today, where you can actually host your front end. So in this video, what we're going to do here is we're actually going to build out this simple application here. So it's supposed to look like a to-do list application, but without all the functionality. So we won't actually be able to add items or update items or delete anything. We're just going to render this out. So in this video, we'll set up our Appwrite project. We'll set up a database. We'll render this out using React on the client side with the web SDK. And then by the end of this, we're also going to host it. Now, as far as building on top of this, I'll put out more videos on how to actually work with the entire database, how to add all that interaction, but we're just focused on getting started here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. Okay, so to use Appwrite, there are one of two ways that you can get started. So there's the self-hosting option, which requires a simple Docker command that you can run. It does require a little bit of extra configuration, or you can always use Appwrite Cloud, which is the easiest way to get started, and that's what we're going to use here. So our cloud offering has a very generous free tier, so don't worry about paying for anything right now. You'll be able to use it for quite a bit of time before you actually get to that point. So to do this, go ahead and go to appwrite.io. You can check out our beautiful website, all our product offerings, and when you're ready to get started, go ahead and create an account. So I already have an account. When you create one, you'll be asked to create an organization. So once you get that organization set up, you'll need to create a project. So let's go ahead and do that. And here, I'm going to call this to do app. And we also want to set up a region. So where do you want your project hosted? Ideally, you want to set this up closest to your customers. So in my case, I'm going to do San Francisco. I'm on the West Coast in the US. And let's just imagine that most of my customers are here. So we set a region, and then we can go ahead and create that. Okay, so once my project is set up, that took a couple of seconds there, we can see our console, and this is our interface for our entire backend. And I want to quickly just go over some of these product offerings. So first of all, we have authentication. This is where we can manage all of our users. We have multiple OAuth providers here that we can work with. So you have everything that you need for authentication and managing users. Now we have our database, we have serverless functions, messaging, storage, and then we have this product here called Appwrite Sites, which we'll use at the end to actually deploy our application. Now, let's go ahead and just get started. Let's go into databases here, and I want to create my first database. So I'm just going to call this main. For the database ID, I can also just let it create an ID for me, or I can actually give it an ID to use. So we'll call the database name, and the ID will also be main2. So we'll create that. And from here, we want to create a table. So we see the database, and now we create the table, and I'm going to call this to do. So in here, the table ID will automatically be created for us as well. We can modify that, but we're going to keep it the same. And we have this cool thing called Smart Column Suggestions. So essentially, what's going to happen is Appwrite will look at our database, and it'll see, or look at the table, and it'll try to assume what we need to create. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and hit create. We turned on auto suggestion. We can always turn this off. And I just want to show you how this works, but I want to manually create these. So right away, it's asking me, do you want to create a task ID, a title, description, due date, is completed, priority, and so on. It's kind of assuming the fields that I would want here. In this case, I want to go ahead and dismiss it because I want to create this manually. Now, we have our built-in columns here. So ID, created at, and updated at, those are naturally built in and will always be there. But in order to create our columns, we can just go into columns here, click create, and I'm going to call this body. So this will be the body of our to-do item. So here we can set the type. We'll set this as a string, but later on when you're using an Appwrite database, we have all these different attribute types that you can set. So we'll set that to string, and let's just say a to-do list or a to-do list item can be about 200 characters. We won't have any defaults, and we will require this. So that's going to go ahead and create that column. Let's add a new one here, and we're going to call this completed. And this is going to be a Boolean value. By default, I'm going to set this to false. So when we create a new item, it's not going to be completed. And we'll also just set required to true. Actually, in this case, let's just leave it like that because required means it's going to be null. So there we go. We have our attributes here, so body and completed. And there's a really cool feature here that I want to show you. But for now, let's just quickly create an item here. So let's just say buy milk. That's one of our tasks here. Let's add some space in there, and then completed manually right now, we'll just set this to false. And there we go. We see our item. So if we want to edit this, we can always change this. So we'll buy milk, and then I'll just say 2 gallons. We can add a note, and that's automatically going to be updated and persisted in the database. So we see that the row was updated. If we want to update it, we can always go here, click update, and this is going to slide out. And here we can change this to completed, set that to true. We can add in more content in here, but it's going to be right within this slide out, and we can hit update. Now, there's a cool feature I want to show you with the database when it comes to pre-filling data. So let's say you're building out an application, you're just testing things, and you don't exactly have the real data that you want to work with, but you want something filled in your database. So instead of manually adding a bunch of items in here, I can always click on generate sample data, and I can specify how many items I want to add. So in this case, I just want a few more items. Let's just say 5 right now. And this is going to automatically pre-fill my database with more items here. So now we see buy milk, and then we see these items that it just added, pre-filled some values, and that just makes things a little bit more convenient. Now, as far as the database itself, in order to actually use this, we need to specify some permissions. So if we connect to our application from the client side right now and we try to make a request, we're automatically going to be blocked because we have no permission set. So nobody can actually access this outside of the Appwrite console just yet. So we can always go into settings here, and in order to update these permissions, we'll go to this permission section, and we're just going to specify any and give any user permission to do anything they want. So we can always specify only authenticated users, only guest users. This is where we also have role-based permissions with teams, where we can specify only certain users with labels that match a certain value can access this database, and so on. So we actually have a really high-level granular abilities to actually modify and control items in the database. In this case, we're just going to say any user can create, read, update, and delete. So that means anybody who now connects to our application can modify any item, and that's all we need to do for now. So make sure you set this. If you have some kind of permissions error, it's because of this step. Don't miss it. So let's go ahead and update that, and now we've properly configured our permissions to our database. Now, another important step before we actually move on to the front end here is to add a platform. So when you're using a client SDK, we need to add a platform. And in this case, I'm going to select web. Essentially what's happening here is this is helping me configure my application to where I'm connecting from. So in this case, I'm just going to set this to localhost because that's how I'm going to connect to my application. And this actually takes care of CORS configuration for us. So essentially, if you want to connect to this from a different application, or when you go live and you have a custom domain, this is where you need to set that, because when you try to access your application or your backend from a different domain that Appwrite doesn't know, it's going to block it. So it's a security thing. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and add this. If you have different port numbers, or not port numbers, but different ways of connecting to your backend, different host names, you want to add this in here. So we want to make sure to set that. I'm just using JavaScript here. Well, actually, I'm using React. So let's click on React, create a platform. And by default, it's giving me a starter template to work with, but I already have an application to work with, so I don't want to deal with any of this. All I want to do is just go ahead and We can skip this, go to our dashboard, and we should be ready to connect to this from the client side. Okay, so now it's time for the fun part. We've set up our backend, we took care of permissions, and now it's time to actually call that backend from the client side. So this is the application that we're working with. I used React to set up a very basic application. If you're using something else, go ahead and do that. It doesn't matter if you're using plain JavaScript, if you're using Svelte or Vue, you can still follow through this process. So I'm just gonna walk through some of the code for those of you that just wanna get some context here or maybe wanna build out the same exact React application. I'll just show you what this looks like. So I set up a very simple application. It's in this app.jsx file. We have no pages. All we have is some dummy data. So it's a simple JavaScript array that should be pretty simple to understand. And then we have this one container that iterates through all these to-do items and then outputs them. So it has a little bit of styling, but that's the entire application. Now, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and configure our Appwrite SDK here. So we want to make sure that we can actually connect to it, provide some credentials, and then we're going to create a function and actually call the backend. So you'll actually see the methods that we need to use. So the first thing we'll need to do here is go ahead and create a .env file. And this is where we're going to throw in some of our credentials here. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste in some of the values that we need. So we need a project ID, an endpoint, a database ID, and then our table ID here. So let's go ahead and bring those in one by one. Now, inside of your console, you can just get your project ID from your overview tab here. Go ahead and copy that, and we're gonna paste that in here. Then the next thing we need is the endpoint. So for the endpoint, I'm just gonna go ahead and paste something in, and then I'm gonna show you how to modify this. So in order to connect to your application, you have this endpoint and it's like that connection string. So what you need to do here is specify your region. So if you selected Frankfurt for your region, that'll be FRA. So there's always abbreviations and you'll be able to identify those in the Appwrite docs to understand which one goes with which. So if it was New York, it's NYC. I'm in San Francisco, so I'm gonna do SFO. So that's the abbreviation for my region, and then we have the rest of the URL here. Now for the database ID, we're gonna go into our database, and here we're gonna select the main database, and here is the to-do database ID. We'll bring that in, and then we also have our table. Actually, I just realized my ID was this main database. We'll copy that, and then for the table ID, here we have to-do, and that's just gonna be the to-do value. And that's what we need in order to connect to our application as far as the credentials. Now, I'm going to create an Appwrite config file here, and I'm going to put this into my source folder, and we're going to call this Appwrite config.js. And in this file, what we're going to do is create our client instance that connects to our Appwrite backend. So here we're going to use some Appwrite classes that we are provided to by the web SDK. We're going to set a few things up, create an instance of our database, and then we'll be able to use these instances throughout our application. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Now, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and install the Appwrite web SDK. So we'll just do npm install, and we'll just add in Appwrite. Now, once this is set up, let's go ahead and just throw that away there or close that out. We still have our server running. We want to make a few imports. So first thing I want to do is import the client class. Then I want to import the tables DB class. So it used to be databases, but now with the new SDK, it's tables DB, and that's all coming from Appwrite. Now, the next thing we want to do is create a client instance. So we're going to go ahead and call client, and that's going to be new client. And I have cursor, but I'm going to try to use tab complete a little bit less here just so we see this all being added to manually. And then once we create that client instance, we need to go ahead and add in some credentials. So first of all, we want to set the endpoint. So the endpoint is going to be this environment variable, which you can actually just manually add in as a string here, but it's going to be that connection string. So sfo.cloud.appwrite.io, that's mine. If you used a different region, make sure to set that correctly. So we set the endpoint. The next thing we need is going to be the project ID. So we're just importing the environment variables here. That's what's happening. And we need an endpoint and project ID, and that gets that set up. Now let's go ahead and just export these. So we'll do export. And I don't want to do a default export. I'll export the client. But at this point, I also want a database instance right here. So we're going to go ahead and call const db. We'll do new DBs or tables DB right here. So we're using that instance, and then we're passing in this client instance, and now we're going to export that. So that's all we need for the configuration. Now I can use this in the application. So from here, I'm going to go into app.jsx. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here. So first, I'm going to remove the default to-do list items here, and we want to import use state and use effect from React. So this is going to be specific to React. If you're using something else, don't worry about this. And at this point, I also want to import DB from Appwrite config. So we bring that in, we bring in that instance. Now this we don't have to worry about. All we need to do is just ensure that we call this data. So now we output real data here. So I'm going to create some space here, and I'm going to go ahead and set up some state. So we'll want to set up our to-dos here. So that'll be our to-dos array. And we'll also want set to-dos to actually set these values. And we're going to call use state here. And that's going to be an empty array. So if I save that, if we go to the client side, we should see that this is now empty. We don't get any errors. Now we have an empty array. So when we iterate through this, nothing happens. Now I want to go ahead and actually call my database and get that data. So for this, I'm going to create a function called get to-dos. Now in this function, I'm going to just create a try catch real quick to take care of some of the mess that can occur when we get an error. And for now, I just want to go ahead and just console that out. So we don't really care about all the functionality. We just want to make sure that we see that there's an error, and we want to get to the important part. So in that try statement, when we call get to dos, we are just going to go ahead and get a response here. So we'll call response, call await, because this is going to be an async function. And we're going to call db.list rows. Now, before, this used to be called list or get documents, so plural. And the reason why that was called get documents is because we used to use the databases class. Now you can still use this class, initiate the instance with databases instead of tables DB, and you can call list documents. So that's the old way of doing things. It's still backwards compatible. Now we call list rows. Now, the first thing we'll need is going to be the database that we want to make this request to. Then we want to pass in the table ID. And at this point for this method, that's all we need. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and pass in my database ID and table ID. So instead of using those environment variables, I'll throw that in right here. So my database ID was main, and then my table ID was to do. So we'll throw that in. And that should call the database right there. And we can fix that later if we want. So for now, let's just go ahead and console.log, and let's just get that response in here, throw that out there, and let's actually call this method. So we're going to use effect here, and we'll quickly set this up with an empty dependency array. And here we can just call get to dos. So we're going to call that, and inside of my console here we can see the response that we get. So I want to zoom in on the console a little bit. So in the console, in that response, we get a total and then the rows here. So that's the response that we get. And then in the rows, we get each item here. And that's what we want to actually set inside of this state. So let's just change this response a little bit. So we'll destructure it. So we'll do total, and then we'll do rows here. Okay, so once we get that, we can go ahead and set to-dos, pass that into the array. And here we will pass in the rows. So for console.log, let's just change that to rows instead of response. And now if I go to my client side, here we go, we see our real items from our database. So it's all these items, they're being rendered out, and we have successfully created our Appwrite backend, set our permissions, added data to the database, and then actually connected to that from the client side. And that's a big part of what you're doing with Appwrite as far as this interaction between the client side and the backend. So we got a lot done here. In the next step, what we're going to do is actually deploy this website and actually make it live. So what we're going to use here is something called Appwrite Sites, and I'll zoom out a little bit just to make sure that this pops up. The sidebar should pop up here. So let's open that up. So it's this sites tab right here under deploy, and we're going to create a new site. So let's just start this process. So we're going to click on create site. And here, what I want to do is connect to a GitHub repository. So there's a few ways of doing this. What I'm going to do is push my project up live to a GitHub repo, and then we're going to connect to it, and Appwrite will deploy it for us. So we'll click on that. Let's go ahead and connect to GitHub. We'll find my GitHub account. I'll add in my credentials here. So now that I'm here, usually want to give Appwrite some permissions. So either to all your repos or some of them. I'm going to go ahead and find my to-do app here. So we'll do Appwrite to-do. I believe that's what I called it. Okay, so here is my repo. So I actually just created this. There's nothing in here at this point. We're just going to finish this process up. So we're going to connect to that repo. We're going to make sure that Appwrite has permission to it. We'll give this a few seconds. Now, before connecting to this and finalizing this process, once I do this, Appwrite will actually start the deployment process. So I want to make sure that this repo is pushed, or my local project is pushed to this specific repo. So we'll zoom in a little bit here. So this is that empty repo, and I already connected to it. So all I'm going to do is check the status here. So we'll just do git status, git add, and we'll just add everything that we changed, git commit, and then we'll just do first commit, and then let's just do git push -u origin main. I believe that's my main repo. Maybe it's master. Okay, so there we go. That pushed the project up. So if I refresh this repo, now the project is on GitHub. So we can go ahead and continue this process. We'll find the repo that we want to connect to. Let's click on connect. And here, if we have any environment variables that we want to set, this is where we want to put them right here under environment variables. So I do have a few here. So let's just go ahead and click on this editor, and let's go to this .env file, and we want to bring them in here. So typically you would have some kind of environment variables that you're setting, save it, and let's click deploy. So it already detected that I'm using React as a framework. Here we can set the branch that we want to deploy, the entry point, and so on. And let's go ahead and watch this. So at this point, it's building. We're going to see all the build logs. If anything fails, we're going to be able to see it right here. If it goes well, we can just watch that process and see how it runs. All right, awesome. So the site is now live. I have this domain right here at this appwrite.network domain. It already created one. For some reason, the preview deployment is not showing. I think I might just need to refresh that. Here we go. Now we see the site, and let's open this up here. And once this is opened, we can see that this is now a live domain. So it generates a URL for us. It gives us this .appwrite.network extension. And of course, we can go further with this by adding a custom domain. I actually have a video on that topic. So if you want to check it out, I'll make sure that's linked up. And as you can see here, we've built out a minimal full stack application. For now, we just have a solid backend that of course we can build on top of, and we have a way to actually deploy it. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you learned a bunch. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next video.